Good morning, friends, or good afternoon, depending on where you're tuning in from. My name is David Wright, and I am the host of the Disruptive Innovators Champions of Digital Business podcast. And today I am lucky enough to be joined by Jean Gomes. Jean, pleasure to have you on.
Oh, it's lovely to be here, David.
Absolutely. I know it's been at least a few months in the making now. Jean, I see you're in the catacombs there. Where are you right now?
I'm at home. This is a kind of product of COVID, actually, because this was just my overflow for my library. I've got a big library at work, and this is the overflow from that. And because the whole family was here all the way through COVID, I got moved out of my study and my other room that I sometimes work in, and I got put in here. And actually, I really like it. It's a long, narrow corridor. I just love it. So I've ended up, when I'm working from home, staying here.
It's amazing. I mean, it's what a beautiful library that you have, that collection of books, and I'm sure we'll get into some of it today. Jean, first and foremost, for those of our listeners who may not be familiar with you and your body of work, can you just tell a little bit about kind of you, your current role, what you're up to today?
Sure. So I am a researcher, consultant, and author, and my focus and the focus of my research-based consultancy outside is to translate the science, the new science of mindset into things that anybody can do to improve their lives, their performance. And in the context of work, that operates in numerous levels in terms of helping leaders make better decisions, helping accelerator teams 10x sustainably their growth plans, and helping people manage themselves from a well-being perspective in a sustainable environment, which is increasingly uncertain and dominated by AI. So all of those things are kind of in the mix of the work that I do.
Very nice. Yeah, we're feeling that uncertainty, particularly here on the other side of the pond with everything that's
Absolutely.
going on politically and otherwise. But I like one of the things that stuck out to me in what you just mentioned when you're talking about 10x, right? Because we're last year my consultancy did like 4x or something like that. But you said sustainably, right?
Yeah.
Because often what you hear, and I mean, there's tons of, well, recently, I feel like there's more conversations surrounding burnout and, there's the author's name, but he talks about the Striver's curse, but just the fact that type A, yeah, maybe you'll hit that 10x, but then like a year later or two, if you burn out and fizzle, like what was the point of
Yeah.
that, right? Or maybe not what was the point, but just like, I mean, for me, the greatest joys in my life have come from exactly what you're saying, kind of that sustainable, uh, you know, growth and satisfaction. And so anyway, I'm excited to learn more about that and the mindset kind of, the science behind the mindset that you've been researching. Um, Jean, one of the things we like to start the episode, because I'm sure there'll be plenty, but if there was only one piece of actionable advice you might look to leave the listeners with today, what might that be?
I think the key to understanding mindset is that it's not about beliefs and behaviors alone, and it's not about frameworks and ideas, and it's certainly not about telling people what to do in terms of behavior. Your mindset is a set of self-awareness mechanisms that naturally occur in your brain and your body, and they allow you to reframe how you look at things. They allow you to rethink the assumptions that you make, and they allow you to draw upon what your body is telling you and to interpret your emotions in a different way, to read that. And if you put those three things together, how you feel, think, and see, you will inevitably create a more powerful and flexible mind. And the reactivity that most people are locked into today, which makes them exhausted, even doing mundane tasks like being on Zoom calls where they're not saying anything, is the key to unlocking both long-term well-being and productivity gains that are extraordinary without working harder. And it's not magic. It's just we are working very stupidly at the moment.
Wow. Um, it's such a gift to do this podcast. I've learned so much over the years, and I just can already tell that I'm going to be enlightened today. So I'm excited. So Jean, we're gonna talk a lot about your current body of work, and really excited to dive into that. Before we do, I want to hear the origin story of Jean Gomes. So how you started out and how you got to the point that you're at in your career today.
So I think there was a kind of mismatch in my life the whole way through the beginning of my education and so on, which I didn't really understand how to reconcile. So on one hand, I loved the arts and music, and I was in a band and loved painting and so on. And I was also intrigued with science, and particularly neuroscience, although it wasn't really called that then when I was doing it in the 80s. But it was those two kind of worlds. And from an academic point of view and from a career point of view, I was torn. I loved the neuroscience research that I did at university, and I also wanted to be in something that was highly creative. So trying to reconcile those two things, and so you know, there was it's a different world back then, and the kind of knowledge industries that were developing, around the media, the arts, advertising, and so on, were nascent. They were quite small, but they were exploding. And that seemed to be where all the action and energy was. So I went there. I kind of went into that world, and I found I was really good at it. I found that there was a lot of opportunity, and I found that I was creative in that environment, and so on. So I basically became a consultant, working in lots of different guises in like large change programs, in communications work, in helping athletes to understand how to perform, a whole range of different things. And I did that for over 20 years. And then increasingly it became clear that the things that I loved doing were helping leaders to lead that change. And then probably about 15 years ago, I reconnected back to neuroscience, because that had suddenly exploded, and there was tangibility around it. You could see, that it wasn't, kind of supposition. It was starting to deliver some hard results. And why that fascinated with me was because all the models around change are fundamentally narrow in their perspective and don't really describe how human beings really change. And that was really the origin of everything that I was doing. And I was always fascinated with it. And when I looked at the problems that, like recurring change problems that would never solve, the underlying strategy that the company was trying to deliver and so on, I was determined to try and go, that next level deeper. So that's where I spent the last 15 years, is trying to build a full stack model of change, right from, neurophysiology upwards through psychology into behavior, and then figuring out the practical ways in which organizations can embrace that. And that is an ongoing job. I mean, it's not, I'm solve world peace, but I have, and with my team, come up with some amazing insights and tools that have helped organizations do things they haven't been able to do in the past. And particularly with the context that we're now in, the hype cycle of AI and uncertainty, polarization, a whole range of really big problems, including climate change and so on. The biggest problem that everybody faces today is that they're just locked into a cycle of reactivity. And yeah, that feels like it's unbreakable for people. So when you say we've got something new or something different and so on, it's like, oh, yeah, another thing. And that's where we've got to get to the core of what needs to change for people, for it not to be that, for it to be a fundamental reset of how we think about ourselves in relation to work.
Wow. There's a lot there. Yeah, that mindfulness for me has been something I've really had to work at, especially in New York City, because one of the last things you said, it made me think of how, like, New Yorkers, we get this bad rap of kind of being like assholes. And in my experience, it's because you could be walking around New York City and you could find the most pleasant person ever, and they could give you directions. That's not unlikely. But the thing is that New Yorkers are so locked in because you need to achieve, and you need to do, and you need to, in order to survive and to feed your family, and like in doing so, you can often lose perspective, and also become almost oblivious to what's going on around you. Or I should say,
Yeah.
I had that experience, and I think sometimes that gets mistaken for uh, being cold, or whatever. And I could see how it could be perceived that way. In Ohio, when you're walking down Main Street, and like, you go to your 9 to 5, and like, I'm not, listen, Bath and Body Works is in Ohio, right? So I'm not like, I'm making a rash generalization, but in certain areas where life isn't so fast, where the need to pay $6,000 a month of rent doesn't exist, I feel like you can go a little slower, or be a little bit more perceptive, and it can work for you. But anyway, that's just one of the things that it brings up. And the other thing that you got me thinking about was, for me personally, um, I really had to, like, for many, many years, particularly in my early 20s, like, young guy, working for another CEO who was starting in this kind of IT digital, helped him scale his business. Pretty successful. Like, I did all right, did well. But I had this self-talk that was it didn't serve me, right? Like, very, I didn't really love myself too much, I would have to unwind that over the years. I think it went back to my childhood, like, yada, yada, yada. But I'll tell you, like, the work that I did, and not to get like too in depth in all of that, but like the work that I did to unwind all of that and come to a place where I did love myself, and then build off that. I mean, I saw my productivity skyrocket, right? Like, I mean, and there was some moments, like, where incredible uncomfortability, or, difficult situations led to that im impetus to actually do the work, and change. But that's all just to say that I think your work on mindset is incredibly important now more than ever. But I mean, I would say that my biggest strides in business came from shifts in my mindset. So,
Yeah. Well, I think that's where, like I've become increasingly clear is that the world knows an awful lot. People know an awful lot, and you can know an awful lot. It doesn't say anything about what you do. And one of the key mechanisms of mindset is something called metacognition, the capacity to think about thinking. And that is the mechanism that enables people to close the knowing doing gap that is just opens up in everything that, that we're trying to do. And that's really what mindset in a way solves. I mean, it solves other things as well, but like at the apex of leadership, it's understanding that the difference between knowing and doing is often missed. The smarter you are, the more likely you are to confuse those two things. And when it comes to, all sorts of issues from, like our sense of identity to polarization and so on, it is like at the root of that. We then got another problem that mindset solves for, which is like mental inflexibility, that we can only see the world in a certain set of ways. And the more that way of looking at the world comes under threat, the more likely we are then to double down on that. So we can't even see that that's happening. We believe it's being done to us as opposed to something that's is a fundamental part of who we are. So all of this to say that when you start to really understand your mindset, it gives you a number of benefits. It gives you this freedom, like freedom to be able to adapt and change, not to hold too tightly to your sense of identity when it isn't actually that at all. It gives you the abilities to adapt and hold a kind of provisional picture of things. I don't really know, but this is the best working hypothesis, and I can update my beliefs as in light of new information. That again is freedom, but it's freedom to act and freedom to not have to know everything. Even if you are an expert, you can interrogate it. And I think, the evidence of this is that when people drive change programs, this is one of the kind of thresholds for me that got me very interested. When you use mindset as the starting point for any kind of transformation or performance effort, you're 400% more likely to be successful. That's why it's, like from an ROI point of view, and it's the missing ingredient in most things.
Yeah, no, that tracks, because if you look at, the McKinsey studies, or like all the things over the last 20 years, and we've talked about it on the podcast before, but the failure rates of digital transformation, it points back to change management and communication. And I think mindset is adjacent, or I mean, it's clearly a part of all of that.
Well, let
That's great.
me tell you why I think it's foundational. Because,
Please.
this is my like heartfelt belief. So when you have a group of people taking on something new, and in the case of digital transformation, this could apply to any kind of topic that you're trying to, they will have a set of things that they're brilliant at, which is the status quo: experience, wisdom, knowledge, track record, blah, blah, blah. Then something, disruptive comes along, which frankly, none of them understand. Not even the IT director. And they're all playing this game of trying to own it, but they don't own it. They don't really own it because they don't understand it, and they don't want to understand it because it's threatening. So what they do then is they outsource it to somebody else, and they outsource it to an extent where they make the person they're outsourcing it to, or the organization, or the people in their organization, take responsibility for defining the goals and outcomes that thing's going to achieve. In other words, they compartmentalize the whole thing. And what that means is they miss the fundamental thing that these things do, which is they are not new capabilities. They are a fundamental change to the underlying business model. They change how we create, capture, and deliver value, which is their number one responsibility. So when this stuff comes back in, they don't understand it. It's a threat. And you go through this cycle of them rejecting because they haven't built a mindset to be able to cope with this.
Right. No, that makes sense. It reminds me of too, like, this is a strange parallel, but like in the States, I'll often see, in the case of like obesity or substance use disorder, or these other like addictions or what have you, that oftentimes folks are treated for the symptom and not the underlying issue. Like here in these instances, it seems like the underlying issue is mindset, like you're saying. It's foundational.
Yeah, but when you say that, for most people, what they have is they have a confused understanding of what mindset is. So we've asked about 10,000 people what they mean by the word mindset, and so the responses broadly fall into two categories. One is as a set of beliefs. This person believes these things. It's kind of like a rigid adherence or whatever. Or it's something completely different, which is to do with how they look at the world. So you could say, this is a finance mindset, or this is a, like a Boston mindset, whatever. It's a lens that you use. It's not about you. It's about something you've adopted externally. And that could be a skill, or it could be a ideology, or it could be, but it's not you. But then what that lens does, if it's too rigidly adhered to, is it creates a set of fixed assumptions about how the world operates in given situations. And then the other piece of this, which is never in people's responses, is your mindset is how you feel about the way you look and think about the world in a certain situation. So when things are going well and it's predictable and the predictions are and your assumptions are true, you feel good, you feel safe because your body isn't metabolically challenged. As soon as you get a prediction error based on what you think, then your body tries to reestablish itself. And that's when you get triggered. That's when you feel exhausted or, stressed. And that's when your thinking becomes rigid. So when you start to see it as kind of this neutral thing, it's not actually it doesn't have a value judgment associated with it. It's just like it's a thing, and we don't have one mindset. We have multiple mindsets that are constantly oscillating all the time and changing. And you go in one meeting and you have a mindset for that meeting, and then you go into this one, you have another mindset. The point here is understanding A, what it is, and B, how to harness it so that it actually gives you the results you want.
It's I mean, a wild concept. Over the course of your journey, was there a moment that you ever had kind of a personal hardship, or a project fail, or something that was a pivotal moment for you, kind of I don't even know if it meant like pursuing this, but just like that had a profound impact on your trajectory as a human, a researcher, an academic, a
Yeah.
consultant?
Well, I think in doing this work, and we're going fast on this because we have like a passion to be able to give this work away to the world, when it's validated, and we're really confident that it works. We want to give it away to the world at free. So I'm in a rush to do this, and I'm also like holding that scientist's provisional mindset that I might be wrong in many different respects, but I'm testing and experimenting, at a fast pace in order to be more right. So like I'm embracing that failure as a day-to-day, thing, and exposing my assumptions to, some of the world's most skeptical leaders, some of the world's most interrogative scientists, people who are completely different from me in terms of the way that they look and think at things, to do that. So I've kind of embraced that, and the vulnerability that you need, I didn't have 20 years ago. Like I needed to be an expert, and I need to be confident, and I did have humility, but like not to the the kind of thinking level that I think I've developed in recent years. But coming back to your deeper question, yes, I have had like I think the only time that I really deeply, profoundly learnt at like all levels in one go was when I almost lost our business. And that was like a crisis point where, in the same month, my second daughter was born and almost died. Our biggest client at the time was huge, spending a very large amount of money with us, and they basically stopped spending because the dot-com bubble, consequences of that. And then there was a whole cluster of other clients who were in that same kind of ecosystem, and they all stopped spending money. And the business went from like, sort of 18 years of just solid growth to overnight, literally hitting a wall. And as you've just experienced with, having young children, that's it's the perfect stuff. And
Yeah.
I had built over that time a really, like a wonderful team of people. And, like I was totally and utterly committed to not firing them because, of like a situation like that, and trying to figure it out. And because we were primarily in tech at that time, it didn't come around. It took like 3 or 4 years before that market started to kind of build back out again. And in that time, I held on to people far too long. And I came to the point where, the cash flow was shortening, and I had to remortgage my house twice. And, I confronted the fear of absolutely everything you can possibly imagine, that, we might lose everything, be out in the street with two young children.
Right.
So,
Right.
yeah. I learned a lot about my values and my strength, and yeah, it was the big growth curve.
That is huge. I mean, and would you say that like because my experience of you in this moment, and on this podcast when I first met you, is that you're very, calm. You seem like very centered. Would you say that you don't let fear drive you today? Like it seems like, or what? Because what my experience has been is that in going through those situations and then, doing work on the other side, walking through that, it becomes kind of a reference such that I know that I can get through something like that and come out on the other side. And so, like, for example, this morning, little hectic, right? Like, had to drop the one child off, and I had or even before that, wake up at 5:30. My wife didn't sleep. She hands me the baby. I'm like making breakfast and lunch for the girls, trying to keep them away from mom, trying to keep the baby fed. It was like, and then I have a call at 8 o'clock with a customer that we've been working with for years, and they got bought out by private equity. And I'm not going to say any more than that because everybody will know who I'm talking about. But, and long story short, we're kind of getting screwed out of an opportunity that we had kind of that we've worked towards for the last number of years, that the customer wants to do, but they're not being allowed to do. And that was going to be our payday for all the work that we really did. And I'm like dropping the one girl off at 8 a.m. while I'm having this call with one of the executives. And I know that everything's going to be all right. Like, I'm not, years ago, I would have been crushed. And like, listen, I was upset. I was pretty mad, like, after I hung up the phone, of course. And I also know that, my joy in life isn't derived from my business dealings, right? It's derived in the impact that we have in healthcare globally, in technology, in how I show up as a father with my family, right? Like, it's not. And so I'm able to, I've found that in having those difficult experiences that I've had, different but the same from yours, it's become a reference such that I know, like, well, this sucks, but and I can just keep moving, and that life happens. So
Yeah. Well, I think what happens when one experiences those kind of trauma events, let's put it that way, because they are kind of traumatic.
right,
Because
right,
they question your sense of value in the moment. So, we did all this work, it's not fair, yeah, I'm not going to get what I want, and so on. And so you're in a triggered state for a period of time where the world, your event horizons really close up, and it's very difficult to think your way out of that moment. Now, the more times that those things happen and you process them correctly, they don't become a source of anxiety. What they become is a source of growth. They don't become any less unpleasant.
right,
That doesn't
right,
go away. But what you do
right.
is you are able to accelerate your ability to move through them. And there's a kind of triangulation goes. One is what you described, which is you can see past it. You can see that there is a future, and that might be developed through having a strong sense of purpose or destination goal or whatever. But you know that you're going to be okay. The second is that you have experience. You have now got a increased emotional register. So those events, what they do is they create the highs and lows, so that when you're here, you're not operating in this bandwidth. You've got this to go to without it destabilizing you, because you've seen it, you felt it. And a few years ago, and I wrote about this in my recent book, where like I had an event like that, and it was really, really, really tough. And I did all the things that I tell and coach other people to do, and it worked, and it had a really good effect. And then the final piece, so like you have a place to go, you can see the future, you've got this experience bank, and the other bit is then the awareness to actually monitor yourself in the moment, is to have that inner coach voice, a sort of third party kind of approach, going, no, you're going to be okay. You've been here before, you're going to be okay. And surprisingly, and that is a metacognition move, thinking about thinking and thinking about how you're feeling.
Right.
That surprisingly gives you a vast amount of sense of control in the situation that you otherwise don't have when you're when you give in or succumb to triggered responses.
Yeah. You reminded me too of before I could even do what you're suggesting and kind of like almost like being this out of body experience of like looking at myself. Oh, so well, of course you're feeling angry. Like this sucks. Like, and like what now? Like the predecessor to that was the pause for me, right? Because so often, like you mentioned as we started out, the kind of reactionary nature of just like going through life, that was me to a T. Something happens. How can I just stop for a second? I don't have to just write that email or make that phone call, or like sometimes the right action in that moment for me is no action, because it allows me that space to take that step back. Nowadays, I'm able to do it on my own a lot more effectively. Um, part part of how I've gotten better at that is by having coaches and advisors and therapists and, all sorts of people that have kind of helped me develop that muscle. Because it is a muscle for me. It's something that and it's not like I've arrived today either. It's like I have to continue to
Mm.
try to improve that. And the other thing that you brought up for me is the fact that and we touched on it earlier, but the humility aspect of things. So like for me, humility was such a big part of the equation, particularly in kind of this surrender to the fact that I have no idea. And what I mean by that is these things happen. I have no idea if they are good or bad, right? And even putting a black and white kind of label on them for me doesn't even make sense, because what my experience has shown me that some of the darkest, seemingly dark moments of my life actually were the biggest gifts. They were the catalyst for the most substantial change. They shifted, things personally, professionally, otherwise. So, but if you would have asked me in that moment, I would have been like, well, this is awful, particularly the stuff that I dealt with like earlier in life. So nowadays it just helps me maintain that, like maybe I lost this client because, if I would have traveled to, middle America, a month from now, I would have gotten hit by a bus. I don't know. Like, I don't know why the universe, you know, and I don't want to go the woo woo path, but like why these things happen. And that's okay. It's okay for me to be in the kind of unknown. And for me, that breeds a level of humility also.
Mm. Yeah, no, I mean, I think this is, part of what, I think mindset helps people to do when they embrace it fully, is one of the mechanisms of the evolutionary purpose of metacognition, our ability to think about our things, our thoughts, and question them, is to entertain doubt. Doubt is not, and I'm not looking at doubt in terms of self-doubt, like I'm no good and all of the kind of connotations, but the ability to question your own thoughts and question, the beliefs of others, and to be able to see things from different perspectives. And yes, you can frame that as humility, but the other way of framing it is that you are expanding your vision, you're expanding your thinking, you're seeing more, and you're excluding less of what a lack of this does. And I'll just give you a really practical technique that we found that is super helpful, which is, if you think about your week, if you're in a reactivity cycle, how much time do you spend thinking about what you got wrong, where you overclaimed, where you stopped listening, where you got triggered and said something unfair or rude to somebody, etc. There's a long list of things that we do all day long, and we don't think about. We just kind of move on. It'll be okay. So constructive doubt is a practice of spending 30 minutes a week on a Friday morning and going back over your calendar and going, like that list of things, and going, so like, what do I need to think about, repair, evolve, and so on? What do I need to learn? What do I, all of those kind of things. And people never do this. They wait until it's too late. They wait until, the evidence is mounted up. By doing this, what you're doing is you're constantly adapting. You're constantly finding yourself in a situation where you're not building these big blind spots, where you're dealing in new realities, accepting them, understanding where to be, and you're healing and repairing relationships that might have been, sort of weakened or damaged through this lack of awareness. And every executive that we've worked with that's taken this on has said this has been transformative. They didn't like it. They don't like it to start off with, because it's a bit of discomfort. But this is where you operationalize the growth of failure little and often as a marginal gain, rather than as a big move you do, when it's either too late or when, somebody's holding a gun to your head.
Yeah. So Sean, I know we briefly mentioned your book earlier. I do like to ask all my guests about their favorite book or literary piece, but for you, I do want. Would you mind just sharing a little bit about your book? I know it was a New York Times bestseller.
Well, I've written a couple of books, and I'm writing another one at the moment. So the first book that I wrote was with Tony Schwartz, who he and I wrote a book called The Way We're Working Isn't Working, and that was looking at taking the science of high performance and breaking it down into a series of strategies to help people build their energy. And Tony was an absolute pioneer in this field, and he and I worked with him for 15 years building the global part of the Energy Project, which was the business that he still runs today. That took that psychology and sports science and translated it into things that helped people like Google and others, like build their cultures out in the early days. And so that was the first thing I did. And then more recently, a couple of years ago, I wrote a book called Leading in a Nonlinear World, and that has essentially two parts to it. The first is helping people to understand this new science of mindset. So it's a little bit, science-based, but essentially anybody can read it. It's not academic in that sense. But what it does is it helps you to really understand what your mindset is and the mechanisms that work, and techniques and practices to help you strengthen not just the conceptual aspect of your mindset, but the brain structure, to grow and strengthen the parts of your brain at a neurological level. And then the second part of the book is really then applying that into a number of areas. So one is like improving your well-being. Another is around how you grow an organization. Another is how you break down uncertainty. And we've used the kind of playbooks that book contains to help a lot of organizations do some pretty remarkable things in the last 5 years. So if your readers are interested in it, there's also an audio version of it, which unfortunately I didn't read, so I'm a bit disappointed in that. But it's certainly helped a lot of people.
Yeah, no, I'm excited. I mean, we're starting to walk down this path with the NHS and a bunch of the people in the UK, and I just know that your book is going to be a great asset, and so I'm excited to dig into it. And does it, do you touch on? I mean, it sounds like you touch on the practical application in different
Yes.
situations as well. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I think the reason why we've laid this out is because there is, we couldn't find a singular actionable definition of mindset. There are dozens of them. The academics have not really arrived at a conclusive definition of it, and none of them are particularly actionable. There are, now, in the last 2 years, I think there are more people interested in this area because it's become, something that people are waking up to. But
Right.
yes, it's laden with very practical tools from start to finish.
That's amazing. Yeah, I think in particular, like Gen X to millennial, like we like the awareness factor of like, oh, we grew up, we got fucked up when we were kids. Like, and then like how do we grow and how do we get better? Like it requires self-appraisal. It requires looking at things differently. And I think this is just another another way to accomplish that, or that's how I see it, which is amazing. So Jean, this has been amazing. I have a couple last questions for you. One I always like to close on, and prior to that would just be like any closing advice to our audience leaders, executives, CIOs, other individuals surrounding your body of work, mindset, anything like that?
Well, I think the thing that is really unlocking a lot of value for people in the digital space at the moment is a way of thinking about the future, which is fundamentally different. So what we tend to do is we tend to establish a goal, think about what that goal looks like realized in a year, 3 years, or whatever, and then build our plan moving forward. The problem with that is that even using the kind of scaling playbooks, the assumptions that are contained within those goals, even if you're doing really good experimentation, are still the defining limitation of most people's thinking. They cannot let go of their ideas. They can't challenge their fundamental assumptions. They can't see the leading indicators that until it's too late to be able to build this stuff. So the future back way of thinking about it is entertaining much more effort up front to translate your goal into an outcome, which is the consequences of success. Assume that it's happened and define everything you can about that, bring it to life with a rich story, and then work backwards of what needs to be true, the problems that needed to be solved, the assumptions that needed to be busted. And therefore, as you work back to today, the bold moves that you need to take. Now, that reliably creates a different understanding of what you need to do. And the psychology of this is quite simple, that we have a relationship to our future self, and therefore, scale it up to an organization where we treat our future self as a stranger. The same neurological processes take place when we think of the future self as they do when we think of a stranger, which means that you discount all the risk into the future. You imagine that your future self will care less about what you care about today. So you are basically parking all of those problems and all those assumptions in the future. And of course, that is why a lot of these things never work. So that would be the one big piece of advice. Go and visit the future, spend enough time and work back.
It's profound. I'm glad I asked. Last question, Jean, is if you could go back personally 5, 10, 15 years in time, what advice would you give your younger self?
Wow. Well, it depends how far I'm going back. I think, if I could go back to, sort of like my, starting off at a career level, I think the
Yes.
one thing that I would love to be able to do is teach my younger self about how to manage triggered responses, like what is a trigger, how it affects you, and to kind of be a little bit freer from, the defensiveness and, judgment that provokes about other people, and recognize it's not about other people at all. It's about just a different state you're in and how to do it. That would be like a game changer, I think, for most adolescent men. If go back, like at like these career points, I think the key piece of advice is like, does your diary, does your schedule deliver your strategy? And just look at it and go, here are all my goals. Does where I'm spending my time do that? And most people, when you do that piece of analysis, about half of what you're doing is not going to deliver anything you say you want. And the only way to actually, achieve the life you want, achieve the goals you want, is to be tough and say no to those things. You can't do them all in the moment, but like you go 6 months ahead in your diary and go, does my diary, does my schedule deliver my strategy? Yes or no? If it doesn't, you're not a leader.
Oh, that was a soundbite right there. Sean, this has been amazing. I learned so much, and I just want to thank you so much for agreeing to be on today.
Oh, it's a pleasure, David. Thank you.
Absolutely. And to our listeners, thank you all for tuning in, and we will catch you all next week.